Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Laura. I'm here representing Accredible. Welcome for the first time for those just joining us for our panel discussion on how McGraw Hill is helping students turn skills into career outcomes. Thank you all for taking time out of your day to join us from wherever you are in the world. Again, my name is Laura, and I'm a member of the Accredible marketing team. I'm very pleased to turn it over to our SVP of Product, Rochelle Ramirez.
Thanks, Laura, and welcome again, everyone. As Laura mentioned, I am Rochelle Ramirez, SVP of Product at Accredible. I am joined by some pretty amazing panelists: Bob Nisbet from McGraw Hill, Frank Sorokach from Penn State University, and Michael DeWolf, a student at Penn State University who has earned multiple SIMnet badges and is pursuing a career in accounting. Each of them will have a unique perspective on how training and education leaders can give learners the tools they need to communicate their skills and abilities, and then to translate those achievements into future opportunities. So diving in, I'd love to kick off learning a little bit more about our panelists and hearing a little bit more about them. So Bob, maybe if you could tell us more about the SIMnet program.
Hi, sure. So thanks for having us, Rochelle, and a pleasure being here. So SIMnet, I'm a senior marketing manager with McGraw Hill Higher Education, by the way. And SIMnet was developed by McGraw Hill to be a user-friendly training and assessment platform for Microsoft Office applications. It does provide content for those core applications of Word, Excel, Access, PowerPoint, and Outlook. But it also covers essential skills for things like computer concepts, file management, and operating systems. For instructors and students alike, it works seamlessly on PCs, Macs, and Chromebooks, and equips students with those kind of vital career-ready skills and provides verifiable digital badges to help kind of validate their proficiency.
Great, thanks. Frank, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you use SIMnet with your courses and curriculum?
Hi, Rochelle. Yes, thank you very much. So my name is Frank Sorokach. I'm a faculty member at Penn State University. I teach business, economics, and technology courses, and we're talking about digital badges today, which is a great intersection of technology, business, and economics. So this is a topic that I really find to be something that's fun to talk about, and it's not often in educational realms that we get to talk about things that are fun for professors and students alike. So really excited to join us to join this conversation today.
Fabulous. And Michael, as a current Penn State student, tell us a little bit more about yourself and then your education path and maybe even like your career goals.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Mike DeWolf. I'm a junior at Penn State University. Right now I'm pursuing a degree in accounting and finance. So I originally came in undecided to college and kind of found my way to accounting. So currently finishing up my undergrad, and then I'm going back to grad school for business administration to get enough credits so I can sit for the CPA exam.
That's great. Thank you all for that introduction. I think maybe we could just go right into the panel. So Bob, if we could start with you. McGraw Hill has been issuing credentials for a few years. You recently issued its millionth badge. Congratulations. It's fabulous. Why did you begin offering digital credentials in the first place?
Well, so absolutely. And, certainly we couldn't have done it without you. So thank you to our partners at Accredible. So we started offering badges about 5 years ago, really to help students overcome challenges and gain an edge in the job market. And there are certainly a lot of challenges when it comes to the hiring process. And primarily that's due to a lot of imperfect information. Some of this imperfect information comes from the employers themselves, vague job descriptions, varying terminology and such. And then also the use of applicant tracking systems adds another layer of complexity. And Frank can tell you a little bit more about that in just a bit. On the flip side, candidates kind of face their own hurdles. And usually the biggest one is the inability to effectively signal what skills they have. When you think about it, a college transcript can tell you about the courses that were taken and the grades that were achieved in those courses, but it kind of falls short in calling out specific skills that students acquire along the way. And that's where digital credentials help both employers and the job seeker by signaling expertise in specific skills. So badges help bridge that gap, reduces that friction in the hiring process. Students benefit by aligning their education with what industry is looking for, and employers gain accurate insights in order to be able to make informed hiring decisions.
Yeah. So along with the digital badges and the credentials, how are you using learning pathways within your program?
So actually, there are a few different ways that we incorporate learning pathways. One is called a SIM path, which is an adaptive learning feature in SIMnet. It personalizes the learning experience by assessing a student's existing knowledge through a pretest. And then based on those results, it guides them through some targeted learning lessons. The platform adapts the content to individual performance, which helps make learning more efficient and more effective. And then the SIM path concludes with a post-test that can help track each individual learner's progress. Instructors can also create lessons or exams directly from existing projects in SIMnet. So projects are comprehensive assignments that cover specific topics or skills, and the students complete these projects in the actual live Microsoft application itself for upload and automatic grading. So instructors can select relevant sections or tasks from these projects, organize them into lessons or exam questions, which allows them to streamline their content. Of course, the content creation ensures alignment with learning objectives and provides instructors that needed flexibility.
Yeah, and building off that a little bit before I ask Frank a few questions, what have been some of the benefits since implementing the badges and the pathways from your seat at McGraw Hill?
Well, certainly issuing over 1 million badges in just 5 years has absolutely increased SIMnet's visibility across social media, and it's helped increase market share in higher education. Studies show that the gamification aspect of digital badging is an effective way to increase learner engagement, since it kind of mimics how the use of social media and video gaming kind of follows a pattern of reward learning, right? It kind of gives students that little hit, that boost, kind of gives them that sense of accomplishment. It also helps make that connection to why am I here, right? Students who grow up with technology may feel that they don't need a computer class, but you can make that connection between the skills that they're learning and the skills that business and industry demand. That, along with the learning pathways, kind of provides that structured roadmap for students so they know exactly what skills they need to acquire and they can track their progress along the way.
Thanks so much, Bob. Frank, you talked a little bit about how you're working with McGraw Hill with your students, and we have one here with us. At a high level, how do you think about micro-credentials, certifications, and degrees? How do those coexist, and how do badges sort of support specific skills?
So I think a lot of times people think that the idea of a college degree and a digital badge are mutually exclusive. They're not. They're actually complementary. So the reality is that we need to look at different ways to educate young people today. Community colleges have high attrition rates. So sometimes you see colleges with 50% attrition rates or even greater. So Bob mentioned earlier learning objectives, right? So taking learning objectives as an example, what digital badges do is they map really nicely to individual learning objectives. So if you have a student who comes in and, let's say, doesn't intend to finish, or for whatever reason can't finish, they can earn some badges. So for the student who drops out of college, there's still something that they take away from their collegiate experience. For a student like Mike, who's almost at the end of his collegiate career, that's someone who gets to leave and has a degree, but also has digital badges. Bob mentioned signaling and screening. So when employers are screening potential employees, they're looking at signals. So if I'm going into the job market and I'm applying for a particular job, how do I really adequately show what skills I have? And the one that I like to really use as a great example is Excel. Most employers say they want Excel, but they really want pivot tables or charts or graphs. And so they may tell the workforce, we're looking for something, right? It's usually pretty vague in job ads. And then a prospective employee goes in and says, well, I don't know what they want, so I'm just going to say no Excel, right? And so then these automated systems, which are called applicant tracking systems, kick people out because there's a mismatch. the applicant's not telling the employer what they know. So what digital badges do are they get very granular in terms of what the skill set is that the person knows, or they can anyway. Not all of them do that, but specifically the ones in SIMnet do this. So when a prospective employee is coming in, a employer can look at that badge and see at a very granular level what the person has. So I'm kind of all over the place here, right? So on one hand, we're talking about education. On the other hand, we're talking about the job market. But these are things that we have to think about in a more integrated way in the future. So how are we sending students out into the workforce? I think about that a lot. And I know hiring managers think about that a lot. And so digital badges check a lot of boxes to fill a lot of the need that exists in that hiring process.
Yeah, and that kind of hits on another question. So thinking about that from an educator standpoint, Frank, how do you start deciding on which learning materials you're going to use for your course? How's that work?
It varies by institution. It can vary by program within an institution, and sometimes the individual faculty member makes those decisions. Most often, programs have defined learning outcomes, so usually that's not left up to the individual, but the individual could tweak that to a certain degree. So then it comes back to what are the materials that you're using. So you're looking for materials that have a great breadth of learning objectives that you can use to fulfill those requirements. So the reality is it very much comes back to materials. So there are all sorts of initiatives out there today with different types of materials. There are old school books. You see a lot of books in the back, right? Everything from books to open source materials. But the reality is that when you look at something like Microsoft Office, you need a product like SIMnet that will stay on top of the changes. And that's where I find value in the SIMnet program. And I get the benefit of being able to deploy these badges as well. And a quick thing before I forget, because this might be a good question for Michael when we get to him. What I find with badges is this idea of gamification. If you put something in front of a student that gives them something to work toward, that gives them a dopamine hit, all humans love dopamine hits, right? So the attainment of the badge is a dopamine hit, they'll pursue that. If you can mix that in ways that also teaches them and gives them some positive outcome like a badge, then again, you're fulfilling multiple objectives. So the reality is that to answer the question, the objectives are determined at whatever level, but the materials are what allow us to do this effectively. I guess that's the way I would answer that question.
Yeah, and then you brought up such a great point about incentivizing the students. So how do you make the students aware of the digital badges, and how do you put that in front of them and kind of motivate them?
Yeah, I actually do it in a counterintuitive way. I make it optional. So we think in higher ed, we have to like make everything a requirement. And the reality is if you can educate people appropriately and show them the benefit to what they're getting, the self-discovery that they have of their own personality will determine whether or not they're going to pursue that. So what I do with the SIMnet badges in my course is, this is a sophomore level course. It's Microsoft Excel and Microsoft Access, which are the harder ends of the Microsoft Office suite applications. And so students have the option to earn the badges. They're not a requirement at all. But what I find is this: students will typically earn a little over 2 badges. So typically I'll have about 20 to 40 students in a section of this class. And I find that a majority of them, so over 70% of those students, will earn more than 1 badge. And I only give them credit when they put it on LinkedIn, because if you earn a credential and it's not on your LinkedIn profile, it never happened. All of this is voluntary, and yet students are still earning over 2 badges on average. And this is at a time when all people teaching at all levels are saying, I can't get students to read, I can't get students to do anything. I can get them to do it voluntarily because I can help them understand the value. And I also give them a little bit of extra credit to do it. So you got to give them, a secondary dopamine hit as well.
Yeah. Because I'm dying to ask Michael some questions and get his perspective on all of this, but what's been your feedback from students when they're using the learning platform like SIMnet as part of your curriculum along with the badges?
Well, if you think back to when you were a student, and it certainly was when I was a student, it wasn't fun, right? No one says, oh my gosh, I can't wait to learn, right? At that age, people have different, different things that they're pursuing. But again, I think we as educators really have to do a strong job of educating students on why what they're doing is important, how these learning outcomes will matter in their future career, and showing them through sometimes we don't show by example, right? So if you all out there in the audience going to look at my profile, it would make me hypocritical if I didn't have SIMnet badges on my profile, right? So, and not only do I have SIMnet, I think I have like 20 some badges of different things on my profile. So we have to lead by example as well. So I think it's a multi-pronged thing, right? And I think it's really a holistic approach to how we educate students in today's world.
Yeah. Michael, I'm so excited to be able to bring the learner's experience forward in one of these webinars. I think it's super exciting that we sort of have all the different parties at play here. Why don't we kick off by what did you do in SIMnet to earn a badge?
Yeah, so as Frank previously mentioned, in my management information technology course, we kind of went through some lessons together as a class, and then we did some on our own. We went through some trainings that were guided by different instructions on what to do through Excel and Access. And so once we completed those, we eventually took a test where we could earn a badge, and then we could post those to our LinkedIn and whatever we wanted to do with it to be able to display it to future employers. So.
Yeah. How knowing you could earn a badge impact your motivation or your approach on learning?
Yeah, so if anybody in the audience or anybody here, you understand how important, especially it is for a business career and especially for accounting, how important Excel is. And so I'm currently an intern at a CPA firm, and I mean, I use this on the daily. So I'm constantly in Excel, and it's definitely something that's taking these courses have driven me to, kind of have that experience and be able to future myself in my career path. So that was the ultimate goal, but along with the extra credit that was offered and just my grades in general. So I had a couple different paths of motivation to follow to complete these badges. So.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the benefit that you're getting out of the badge itself, and then how are you using or displaying and showing the skills that you gained that the badge represents, and how are you using those today?
Yeah, so I have all of my badges on my LinkedIn that I earned, but I also put those on my resume so my LinkedIn and my resume can be reflected. And, having it on my resume, I've gone to many different interviews now, and it's kind of a talking point to start with. So, they say, "Oh, I see these credentials on your resume. Can you talk a little bit more about that?" So not only like am I saying, "Oh, I have Excel skills," but I'm able to show it through these badges. So it's been great for me, and it's definitely been a positive.
Yeah. That's fabulous. I know Excel skills are definitely still an everyday needed thing to display out in the world, no matter what a lot of your roles are in business.
It's probably the number one in-demand skill in the workforce, period, right? That's my guess, because it doesn't matter what the career is, everybody's using Excel, right? So I don't think there's a skill that you would be more critical to know in today's world.
So I want to talk a little bit about turning skills into career opportunities. So Bob, I'm going to kick this question over to you and get your perspective, and then sort of augment a little bit and ask Frank for his perspective from the educator side of things. How are you helping learners from McGraw Hill standpoint to adapt and interpret their earned skills and apply them in like their current and future context?
Well, certainly, our digital badges are a great way to kind of draw that connection, like we were saying before, like, hey, why am I here? Why am I learning this? Well, these are the skills that industry demand, and this is why you're here learning this. And to kind of prove that point, our digital badges also provide job market insights that are visible to students. So they can see not just the specific skills associated with each level of badging, but they can also see who are the top organizations looking to hire people with those exact skills, right? What the job titles are, what the salary ranges are, and more. So at McGraw, we certainly champion these credentials and with students, and we encourage them to brag the badge on sites like LinkedIn. Saw a question in the chat too. It's not just LinkedIn, it's Facebook or X, formerly known as Twitter. There are other social media sites that this can be shared on for sure. And just like Frank said, earning credentials is great, but it has no value if you don't share it. So these efforts are absolutely working. If you go to LinkedIn yourself and type in SIMnet digital badge or SIMnet black belt in the search box, you'll see the search results of of students who have earned that SIMnet credential, and they're shouting it out. They're saying, hey, employers, look at me. I have the skills you're looking for, so you should consider me as a candidate.
Yeah. And then that leads me right into Frank. Like, how do you determine what skills are needed and then like map them into your learning, right? So you're trying to bridge that gap between employers and learners and what Bob and publishers have to offer. So how do you determine that?
Well, before I answer that question, I have to go back to something Michael said before. Sorry, I'm like a nightmare on a podcast, right? So I'm just going to go off and riff
I
on
love
my.
it.
So something Michael said. I'll forget this. So notice what he said. He took his digital badge. So we think of digital badges because Bob alluded to the question that was asked before, right? Can you put these on other platforms? He put it on his resume. That's very old school of him, right? So it doesn't matter. A credential is a credential, right? The point of the digital credential is it's easy to get out to social media. But look, if you have a skill, and this will answer your question, Rochelle. So if you have a skill, you need to let people know what that skill is. It goes back to what I said before. It's Excel skills, it's data skills. It doesn't matter if you're in biology, you're crunching data. If you're in economics, you're crunching data. If you're in business, you're crunching data. If you're in a nonprofit, you're crunching data, right? Everything's about data today. So the most important skills are around teaching students how to work with data. Every program everywhere should have an Excel requirement because everyone's going to have to touch it at some point. I think someone said earlier in the chat here, like they wish they'd had more Excel skills taught to them. So I think what employers typically want though, so I'm always thinking about what's the employer want, because I want to take a student and make them very employable. That's the end goal, right? So it's the high-end Excel skills. It's any kind of data analysis, and Excel's evolving quickly. So Microsoft Access is probably going to go away at some point. No one knows that for sure, but it's probably going to go away because Excel now can handle all this analysis that we used to do in databases. So you can download 100,000 rows of data and analyze that in Excel. XLOOKUP, pivot tables, charts, and graphs. Those are the kind of things that students need to know coming out of college today. So it's those high-end visualization kinds of things that students can take data and turn it into something meaningful.
Thank you. And I agree with the comment that Excel plus IA will be amazing. And that badge it'll be coming and amazing. So before we switch over to Q&A, we have some great questions queued up for us. I just wanted to check in and see if anybody, any of our panelists had anything that they wanted to add to this. Otherwise, I'm going to kick over and bring forward some of the questions.
I'll throw something out there, Rochelle. This is a challenge to everyone out there, right? Earn a badge. It doesn't matter where you earn the badge. Just if you haven't earned one before, go get a badge. If you don't have a LinkedIn profile, you have to have a LinkedIn profile today. So what employers are doing now is they're not even posting jobs anymore. They're literally going out and querying people's LinkedIn profiles to find the skill sets that match the job, and they're just making offers. I know a person who had 3 job offers in a month without applying for any jobs. Of course, they had to go through the application process and do that. But imagine someone tapping on the shoulder saying, come apply for this job, right? That's really where the world's going. And that's why having a really well tricked out LinkedIn profile with everything correct, of course, and everything honest, but that's so critical today. And so if you don't have LinkedIn, you should. If you're not teaching your students about it, you should. Even if you're at the high school level, high school faculty should be teaching students. You can, at 16, register for a LinkedIn profile. And if you've never earned a badge, just go earn one. Doesn't matter what it is, and put it on your LinkedIn profile. So that's my thoughts on that, Rochelle.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. That's I think it will definitely be a new landscape where we're all having to curate our data in a much different way than we have in the past in order to get into the workforce. So with that, I'm going to kick off some of the questions that we have, and we'll go through as many as we can. So, and then feel free, whomever feels the best to answer the question, just pick this one up. What is the optimum number of digital badges provided? Is there evidence of overkill where badges become less valuable to the whole? So can you flood people with badges?
Quality over quantity. That's what I would say. So I don't think there's a magic number. if you saw someone with 50 badges on their profile, you might question the validity of that, right? So I think it's judicious, when you're earning those badges, it should be something that's relevant specifically to your career path. And I think that that's really the way people should think about that. But once you earn one, you're going to want them all. So then you're going to feel the desire to put 50 of them out there on your profile, right? That's the downside.
Bob, what about from your standpoint? McGraw Hill, do you have a thought on how you apply badges to some of the learning, or how you make recommendations to the educators about badging?
So just like Frank said, there really is no optimal number that's out there. What we do is we provide the ability for instructors and students to make the choice as to which badges they want to pursue. Some of them are going to be more relevant in certain industries. So in sort of like maybe like more like a web design, something that has, more artistic capabilities, maybe those PowerPoint badges might be worth more versus, if you're going to go like Michael, if he's going to go sit for a CPA exam, those Excel analytics skills are going to be a lot more pertinent and relative to him. So it really all kind of depends on the direction and the path that the student wants to go in.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so our next question is, do you co-create the badge requirements with industry partners? How do you educate the industry on the content of the badges?
So actually, a little bit of the history of this. Digital badging itself was actually created back in about 2012. It was a partnership between the Gates Foundation and Mozilla, and it was designed to be able to provide a sort of secure way for people to be able to identify and kind of be able to broadcast the skills that they have. And the secure component is a big deal, right? Because it has to be something that has to be earned and validated so that you are who you say you are, and the skills that you have are the skills that you actually indeed have. Many studies, and Frank has done a lot of research on this as well. IBM is a famous example where they've implemented badging as part of their professional development, and they saw just really astronomical increases in terms of their engagement in courses, completion rates, and pass rates. So it's really helping to fill those skills gaps. Many CEOs will say that they know that there are skills gaps that they've identified in their workforce, but they don't know what to do about it. They don't know how to address it. So badging kind of fills that need and fills that niche. And in terms of industry partners, obviously Microsoft is a huge industry partner with us. We certainly can't write updates to 365 content without getting access to 365 and access to some of those Microsoft resources for authors and subject matter experts to be able to do that. So, and then this third layer, I guess you can call it, is taking a look at industry companies out there that kind of aggregate and collect data. So, companies like Lightcast. Lightcast is a company. They kind of collect and analyze job postings, and they gather data sources from all over the country, job boards, company websites, and they can kind of collect and aggregate as well as sift through and identify what are the most sought after skills, what are the experience requirements, the education requirements, and so forth. So there are definitely a lot of different sources that go into those badge requirements.
Thanks,
Frank,
Bob.
anything to add on that?
Yeah, I just completed I'm in the midst of doing some research. So I completed a survey maybe 3 months ago of employers. I have about 850 respondents, and it's their opinion on digital badges and a few interesting takeaways. Again, this is not published yet. I'm working on that. But one of the things that I found that was interesting is HR managers typically are more tuned into these than line managers would be. So I think there's an education piece that has to happen all over the place, right? And I certainly find this to be true in higher education. We're not sure as professors what to do with these things either, right? So we have to create some kind of standard ways of thinking about digital badges. Another interesting thing was I did a trade-off comparison. So I asked people in this survey to choose prospective employees based on different mixes of experience versus badges versus degrees. And what was interesting is badges are behind. So they're still behind degrees and experience. So it's an education thing. Again, people aren't as aware of those. But what I did find is the branding of the badge has an impact. So if you're going to look at badges, the quality of the badge certainly matters. So that kind of goes back to your question earlier about how many badges. It's really more about what is that badge telling us? What's the quality? What's the association of the badge? The other thing was you would think that for employment hiring managers that they would be looking at like degrees as the top thing. Experience was the number one thing. The more experience a person has, the better the prospect they are. And what that tells us is it's about skills, right? And this is again where badges can fill that gap. Once we educate people what badges are and how they work, it fills that gap of signaling in a really strong way what specific skills that person has. That's why I'm such an advocate for them, because I really believe that better than anything else, a badge is going to say, Michael took some sort of assessment and knows Excel based on that assessment. And that assessment required that he have a 90% to achieve the to pass the assessment to get the credential. That tells me a lot more than, yeah, he used Excel at a prior job or he learned Excel in school. So the badges really tie all these things together. Michael, a quick question for you. How many badges are on your profile? This will answer Rochelle's question from earlier, maybe how many, because you just got a job not too long ago and you have badges. So how many do you have?
I believe I have 4 or 5.
Okay, so that's our official number for right now. 4 or 5 badges is the magic number. So we have better data.
There we go. And we'll keep following Michael and see how it goes. Frank, I can't wait to see how your study comes out, because I think the collegiate UPSIA study that was out a little bit ago talked a little bit about who recognizes badges, also the C-level versus HR versus the hiring managers. And that also broke that out. So it'll be super interesting when that comes out. On that same line, though, let's talk about faculty incentives. So we have a question from one of our attendees. Frank, can you talk about how your university incentivizes faculty to engage? We find that faculty make university decisions and they're not usually incentivized by what the market is demanding, but rather what they get graded on, right? Which is teaching and research. So I think that's a really interesting question.
Yeah, I didn't expect such a hard question. So I've got to think about this one for a second. Okay, thought about it for a second. So here's the thing. The reality is it doesn't matter what the institution tells faculty to do. There's academic freedom and faculty do what they want to do at the end of the day. So I have to adhere to the same restraints and requirements that all my fellow faculty teaching this same 200 level MIS course that is the only course where we teach Excel to business students. There's dozens of faculty across Penn State in the state of Pennsylvania teaching this class, and everyone teaches it differently. I'm probably the biggest advocate for digital badges. I see that they fill a really important need for students, and I'm thinking about this in a different way. I alluded to that earlier. I'm worried about the student who drops out of college, who doesn't finish. What can they take away from this? It's a different type of thought, right? I think individuals have to determine how this fits into their curriculum. What's great about badges is if you even go into high school, you can go to grade school and you can take a piece of paper and make a badge, right? And give it to kids. So I think we have to figure out for us as faculty, what's the right thing to do with badges. And I think everyone's going to come to a different answer on that until the market tells us otherwise. What we do know is this: historically, college degrees fit a very important aspect of the job market, right? So we know so many jobs require a degree. Nobody's requiring badges. So until that day where we have some sort of definition for where badges will fill the need, it's really up to us as individuals. The thing I have seen from an institutional standpoint is every institution handles badges differently. I know of some that are very deep into badging and doing a lot with badging. I think most aren't doing anything. And I guess the takeaway would be this: if you don't have a program for badging, you're not going to convince your institution to do it. Everybody's under tight financial constraints. What you have to do at that point then is go find a partner like Bob at McGraw Hill, someone who's got quality badges that you can utilize in your curriculum where you don't have to recreate the wheel, because it's very hard to put badges together and come to you folks at Accredible and try to get all that right. That's it's a process, right? A well done badge is a well vetted process. And so I think it's really important to just find partners that can help you do that. So I hope that helps a little bit.
Well, and to build on that too, certainly having a badging partner like Accredible lends that credibility to not only just the SIMnet product and the McGraw Hill content, but the Accredible platform, which is, you know, industry known. Some of your other partners include the names you might have heard of, like Google, and some of your other partners, Rochelle, include
Google and Slack and Snowflake and a lot of universities. So quite a few different partners. So I'd also like to poke on that last question a little bit with you, Bob. If you have a fair amount of breadth in universities that you're also working with, do you see the same as Frank, that it's, you know, the educator should just move forward and think about it a little bit differently versus getting mired down? Do you see universities starting to incentivize any of the educators to move forward with the badges?
Well, you know, there are certainly a few things to take in consideration. You know, it's recently and just in the news in the last couple of weeks, you know, some of, I live in the Northeast, you know, some of the more prestigious universities and colleges are now approaching $100,000 a year for tuition. And, you know, when do we hit that point where the bubble is going to burst, right? And you'd have other alternate pathways of certification. I was looking at Angela. She put something in the chat about career and technical education and, you know, sort of competency-based education. So when you think about it, colleges, universities, you know, your competition isn't each other. Your competition are the edXs and the Coursera's and the Google IT certificates of the world, right? So I think it really has to be taken very seriously. And if an educational institution, the individual instructor with their individual choice can help promote that and kind of incorporate the idea of not just, you know, your diploma and your degree, but then, you know, that stackable credential on top of that.
Thank you. I want to ask one of the questions from an anonymous attendee. Do you ever experience students completing a task just to complete it to get the badge? So like what's in place to really ensure that they have the skills? And
Yes.
I know, yeah, there's testing. So maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so there are different types of badges, and there are completion-based badges, and then there are assessment-based badges. And SIMnet uses a mix of those. So for Excel, you can earn 4 different badges. 2 are completion-based, go through the book. And what's great about SIMnet is, I love this. Students do not read today. The one universal thing you will hear from faculty all over is, I can't get students to read. So what SIMnet does is, instead of requiring students to read, they have to actually perform the exercise. So to bold a font, click B, like they actually have to go through that exercise. So for 250 learning objectives. And so as they complete those, they receive a completion badge for completing the book. So basically they can get a badge that says, I read the book. Then there are 2 assessment-based badges. One is for a project. There's no faking that. So you have to get a 90% on the project to do it. I personally did the project. This is probably 3 years ago or so. And I said, I was a Saturday afternoon. I'm like, I'm going to do this myself. And I should easily be able to get 100 on this and, you know, not have to think about this too hard. But I wanted the badge on one try. I got it on one try, but I got like a 90.5, and I've been using Excel for 25 years. So it wasn't easy. Like, this was not an easy thing to attain. And the black belt is done via exam, and less than 2% of the people that attain the black belt, or less than 2% of the people that attempt the black get it. So, or I should say 2% of people that have badges have the black belt. So it's a really low percentage, really super hard to get. So that's what I like about the SIMnet badges. Of course, different companies that issue badges do different types of assessments, but that's what I would be looking for, something that's assessment based. That's really going to tie that together, I think.
I could speak a little bit on this too, in terms of, you know, I've done LinkedIn Learning and I've done SIMnet as well. And, you know, it's kind of hard to go around something when you're actually working on it and you're hands-on. I'm a very hands-on person. And especially for Excel, I mean, with SIMnet, you're forced to actually do the activity, whereas LinkedIn Learning, it's kind of, you can kind of get around it if you have some common prior knowledge on it, because it's just pretty much a test. You're not actually doing the activity itself.
Thanks, Michael. I think we probably have time for one more question.
There was a quick one. Can I throw it out there? I saw it,
Yeah.
Rochelle. It was a question on MOS, because this is a great question. So Microsoft Office Certification, Microsoft Office Specialist, MOS, is Microsoft's version of, it's really a badge now. It's become a badge. And so someone asked, you know, really what's the difference here between SIMnet versus, let's say, the MOS certifications? And so Microsoft has long certified on different types of products. So you can go take an exam and achieve the MOS. That's the gold standard. It is the gold standard, but it's going to cost students $100. And so institutions don't require it of students because it costs a lot of money. And if you have to take 2 attempts, now it's $200 or whatever, something like that, right? So I don't know very many educators at the collegiate level that are requiring MOS. So in lieu of having MOS, when a student gets the SIMnet materials, it's the book for the class. The badges are part of what they buy with that. So there's no additional cost. So that's why I tend to lean on the SIMnet badges.
That's great. And I'm going to try to squeeze in one more question. I think Fran had a great one in there that kind of continued our line of thought. Colleges are currently offering credit for AP courses in high school. Can we expect to see college credits for badges? What do you both?
I think so. I think it's 5 years off, 10 years off, but I think colleges will be forced to do that because it's at the skill. Remember, a degree is sending a signal that I have wherewithal to go through 2 or 4 years or whatever of a program and complete that, but it says nothing about my skill set. If Michael comes to me and applies for a job as an accountant, I have no idea if he knows anything about Excel, but I can look to a badge, and I think you'll probably see, and some are doing this already where they're starting to tie badges to learning outcomes in classes. You will probably see this at some point. Yes.
Yeah, I totally agree. Bob, did you want to add?
Yeah, no, just, kind of building on what we're saying about before, right? So, there are those alternate pathways, alternate certification out there, and, badging provides that secure platform to be able to, again, make sure that, the person is who they say they are and the skills acquired are the skills indeed that they do have. So, yeah, badging is here. Badging is here to stay. It's growing. The current time period that we're in, the expected compound annual growth rate is expected to be, upwards of 23 to 26% in the current time period that we are. So, badging is only going to get more prevalent and more relevant the further we go.
I want to thank all of you for your time today. That concludes the Q&A. So I'm going to hand this back over to Laura for some of our final messages.
Thank you, everyone, for taking the time out of your day to join us. That's all the time we have for discussion and Q&A. I want to thank everyone for joining us, and a special thank you to Bob, Frank, and Michael for sharing their time and experience with us. It was a really great discussion, critical topic. If you'd like to learn more about how education and training leaders are helping learners and students connect skills to career outcomes, I encourage you to check out the chat. We've got a resource there about increasing program enrollment and completion with learning pathways. Saw a couple good questions in there. We'll also send the link out with the recording before the end of the week. And Bob, would you like to share a little bit about the clickable demo of SIMnet?
Sure thing. So again, we certainly thank you, our partners and friends that are credible for this partnership. But it is truly a collaboration, and we certainly couldn't have issued 1.1 million badges without you. So for anyone out there on the webinar today that would like to learn a little bit more about SIMnet, I'm happy to answer your questions and put you in touch with your local sales team. And on our website here, we also have a self-paced click-through demo if you just want to take a quick tour of SIMnet at your own pace.
Great. Thank you again to our panelists and to our moderator, Rochelle. Have a wonderful day.